Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the forum. It will be the closing session in the form of a round table. Let me introduce to you the moderators. We have Keum-sil Kang, Executive Director of People for Earth. We also have PLZ, Director of United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. And we have 7 panelists. So-young Lee, a member of National Assembly of Korea. Kwang-gil Kim, Director General for Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Office, Ministry of Unification Korea. Chun Kwang-byun, Director of Peace Region Progress Headquarters, Gangwon Province. Byung-jin An, Professor at Global Academy for Future Civilization at Kyung University. We also have Sang-min Nam, Deputy Head of UNESCAP, Sub-Regional Office for East and Northeast Asia. Stephen Klingerbill, Director of UNDP Seoul Policy Center, Republic of Korea. And lastly, also Hyung-jun Lim, Director of UNWFP Korea Office, Republic of Korea. But before we move on to the roundtable discussion, we have opening speeches for this session by Keum-sil Kang and PLZ. This will also be followed by a report presentation by Samuel Bruley-Sauer, who is a research analyst at United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. Having said all that, I would like to invite PLZ, the Director of UN Research Institute of Social Development. Mr. PLZ, are you there?
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
I'm not going to make a speech. I think you'll be glad to hear. We've got enough panelists today to answer some of the questions that have been posed through the conference. I want to give the panelists a heads up before I pass to my co-moderator. The first question I'm going to be asking you is really one that came from a member of a participant conference before the conference, and I think has been reinforced throughout the conference. It's about how do we make this approach real in practice? How do we implement it? Who are the actors that we can ask to take this forward? What is needed? Is it resources, research, support from institutions? So that's going to be my starter question, and I wanted to give you a heads up so you can start thinking about it before, once we've heard from Sam, then we can go straight into answering some of the questions that have come up in the conference. Thank you. Over to Keum-sil.
Thank you. I am Executive Director of People for Earth. For 3 days, we discussed many different topics on the Borderlands and peace, and we are now having this closing session. We had people from 9 UN entities and participants, or 17 from 17 countries, and 66 experts and scholars attended as presenters. I'd like to thank Gangwon-do and Cheorwon County Office for hosting this event, and I also would like to thank the participants and viewers from online and offline for active participation and asking questions, and in particular on this Nexus on Borderlands. We are having this forum proposed and organized by UNRISD, and Dr. Lee Il-chung I'd like to thank, and I also like to thank Professor An Byung-jin and the Director Yang Ji-young, and we also have many other staff who worked hard, including Kim Go-eun and all the other staff members for putting this event possible. Today, we had many great and insightful presentations, and many people said this forum is really meaningful. We are now having this closing session, and we will hear more from our great panelists as a wrap-up for the past 3 days, and look forward for a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mr. Samuel Bruley-Sauer for the report. Over to you, Samuel.
Thank you. So I will briefly share my screen here. Wonderful. Thank you very much. As I was introduced, my name is Samuel Brüllisauer. I work with the UN Research Institute for Social Development, in particular with Dr. Il-Chung Yi on this exciting conference and project that may evolve from it. And I had the honor to listen to every single session, to all of the 9 sessions, and giving you now a short summary that can be the basis for the ensuing discussion. We had these 7 main sessions and the 2 special sessions that happened earlier today. We talked about borders and borderlands in the 21st century, peace by peaceful means. We talked about diverse approaches to harmony with nature in the context of peacemaking in borderlands and their relationship with peace and development. We've also discussed the relationship between sustainable development and the transformation in borderlands. And lastly, there was the session only by representatives of the United Nations about how the UN can intervene in order for peace building to happen in borderlands sustainably and inclusively. First of all, we heard opening remarks by representatives from Korea mostly. We heard from Cheorwon as a borderland itself that Cheorwon has been yearning for peace more than any other province in Korea. But however, due to its situation as a borderland, it has also become less prioritized in development than others. We have heard a lot of hope for the DMZ to develop into a symbol for peace and for unification, also for climate action, environmental protection and cooperation. And we've heard the willingness to work with local, national and international partners, including with North Korea, to collaborate on peace building, on environmental cooperation and social and cultural development cooperation. And finally, in the opening remarks, we heard from UNRISD Director Paul Ladd about that sustainable development is not possible without peace, and that actually deeper peace requires this deep cooperation between peoples themselves, and reminding us that borders and borderlands can be precisely the place to bring people together around these goals. The first session on borders and borderlands in the 21st century addressed, first of all, a few conceptual questions. What are we dealing with when we talk about borders and borderlands? We have had borderlands described as, or as often portrayed as marginal places, disconnected and lagging places that are torn by conflict, that are unruly, and residual from the perspective of central governments. But in contrast, we've also heard, and I think this is one of the interesting takeaways that has been emphasized over and over again over these 3 days, that borderlands are also laboratories of change. They are innovative and creative. They can be resilient and dynamic. They are key and challenges to elites at the same time in countries. They are sometimes rich in resources and often a source of power for the political actors, even far away. Then we've also heard about borders and borderlands that are, of course, we might say, divided, that are sometimes strongly militarized and often so in a quite gendered fashion. We've heard about militarized masculinities in one presentation. We've also heard about how some borderlands, many countries are indeed neglected and still controlled from the center, overruled by a political power in capitals that is very far away sometimes from these borderlands. And ultimately, we've also heard about the romanticization that borders as bridges may be more of a cosmopolitan feel-good narrative than actually in touch with the reality in many borderlands as such. Other lessons from these first sessions were that it is exactly this centeredness on capitals and on the national level as such, on the state in policy and research, that is still very prevalent. And that often also seems to be a justification of intervention, because we don't really look at the local consequences of interventions for borderland populations, but tend to focus indeed on how the state centers, how the politicians, how power in the capitals is actually reacting and maybe desiring such interventions. And these are extremely important lessons, not only for local development, but for peace as such. The second session, on peace by peaceful means, had 4 presentations, and most of them indeed portrayed or criticized current forms of peace building as top-down, as like liberal forms of peace buildings, often as state-centered practices, even as neo-colonialist practices that often rely on outsider skills and perspective, but also then rely on assumptions made by outside actors who may be absolutely unfamiliar with the conditions in borderlands. We've also heard about the gendered and racialized masks that peace builders may embody. We're talking as masks. We're talking quite practically about perceptions of peace builders as interveners, as men, as savers, as women, often as victims, and so on. And a sustainable approach to peace by peaceful means in borderlands definitely requires to see through these gendered and racialized masks, and also the anthropocentrism that especially has its impact as the environmental dimension comes in peace building. So quite in contrast to such liberal peace building, we've heard a lot about bottom-up approaches to peace building, including the local populations, built on grassroots movements, built on conversations that are culturally embedded and supported, that may take a long time, but also do actually build the basis for a long-term engagement of people and commitment to the outcomes. We've heard about natural resources, especially water, as a scarce resource that can be the source of conflict, but also very illustrative examples of how water can also be the opportunity for cooperation and an entry door for peace building, because it creates new links and a new platform to talk about between conflictual parties. Finally, there was an argument made in this session by Professor Oliver Richmond that we should indeed, while we look at this local dimension, while we try to strengthen the engagement of the populations in borderlands, we should also not at the same time abandon a macro view on all this, and how we should use these stories to indeed challenge a global extractivist, patriarchal and capitalist view of peace, and instead call for substantial reform of the global political order based on such engagement with subaltern claims. The third session, and the first one that dealt with the question harmony with nature especially, introduced the concept of harmony with nature as a concept that is deeply non-anthropocentric, so that looks at the human as part of nature much more than on top of the nature of the pyramid of nature. And related approaches such as Earth trusteeship and Earth jurisprudence, which have been shown to be drawing important lessons from centuries-old traditions, from indigenous people, from also spiritual approaches such as spiritual humanism and Confucianism, and as well as philosophy and theology. But this harmony with nature concept is not only based on these, but also has already become materialized at level of policy and law. There were UN General Assembly resolutions that recognized nature as a subject of law much rather than a passive part that is administered and controlled by humans, but that actually gives a right to nature and to non-human life as a subject of law. And this is in stark contrast to current approaches to environmental law that can be understood complicit in actually the further degradation of the environment. We've also heard an interesting suggestion to consider the DMZ as a whole, as a one unit, as one subject of law, so that the DMZ is at the same, so that this approach at the same time then making sure that there is a legal foundation for the protection of the DMZ, but also an entry door actually for the peace talks between North Korea and South Korea, so that the DMZ could be a trust that is being administered together by both parties, while in itself actually an independent subject of law as such. That we've also heard a very interesting presentation by David Havlik about transitions from conflict to peace and how that often leads to zones of militarization of borderlands that were strongly separated, that suddenly these symbols are still very present, but gradually are often moved also, or like transitioned into conservation sites. And there is often a very complex, extremely interesting, but complex intersection of erasure and commemoration at the same time, where history is being retained, but only partially, while ecology is also coming back into the picture, such as in the European Green Belt or in Cyprus and other places in the world. The second session on harmony with nature had as one of the questions that were dealt with the tension between concepts of sustainable development that are maybe rather human-centered or clearly human-centered, while harmony with nature is not anthropocenic as such. We've also discussed the DMZ as a place that is socio-nature in such sense that it is not untouched nature at all, but rather a dynamic space for humans and non-human actors to interact. And then that borderlands are also the place, or that peace-building processes based on concepts of harmony with nature can also be the spaces, or like the occasions for to co-create these spaces with new ideas and plans and policies, including peace parks and conservation sites, cultural events, including such as this festival, as well as art. We've heard about the expression that borders are scars of history by Schumann once, and that this could also be transformed into an active creation of these scars, so that they become beautiful scars. However, then while we do have these very ambitious ideas, there's also the question, how do we get there? And this session discussed again Earth jurisprudence as an alternative, where we indeed just give the right as a subject of law to nature. We've also heard to incorporating such an approach into diplomacy, that we not only think as diplomacy between two conflictual parties, but also that takes into account the rights of human and non-human life living in borderlands. And as such an approach was also suggested for the DMZ, where again, from an idea of a peace park, the DMZ would become more considered as a legal person, and thereby cooperation for the environment, not as a means to achieve peace, but as an end in itself, based on rights of nature in the DMZ. The fifth session on sustainable development and transformation in borderlands brought in the questions of social policy and citizenship, and how that relates to borderlands, as it depends clearly social citizenship on the existence of borders to some extent, and often extremely interesting interactions with it. We've heard a critical perspective by political ecology as an interdisciplinary perspective that looks at the non-human nature in the context of global capitalism. Also how the environment is socially and politically constructed and produced, while indeed often glaring over local knowledge and experiences, which is a point that we've already seen come up in other sessions as well, where borderland populations are often disregarded from the important conversations about environment and peace building. Once more, we've been reminded as well of the complexity and dynamism of borderlands that are, again, often falsely portrayed as disconnected and kind of fringe, while they are often full of resources, of interesting and very dynamic relations and network, often the basis as well of transboundary livelihoods that have a very specific, very particular form of resilience that may depend even very strongly on the openness and fluidity of these places. And we were reminded that for the UN, for policy, but also in research, what we often do need is indeed actually more of a focusing into these borderlands areas, so that we abandon mainly a nationalistic focus, in the sense of thinking of country offices, thinking of having country case studies and such, where we just then often have an over-focus on the centers, on the capitals, etc., while strongly neglecting the importance and the particular situations of people and the environment in borderlands. The last session, number 6, was about interventions by the United Nations. We had several speakers from the UN World Tourism Organization, from UNESCO, from UN Development Program, UN Environment Program, and others. And what we could see, or what came out from the discussions, is that the borderland perspective is still very marginal within the UN. So there's, again, also here the focus on centers and capitals. The UN is also often, it was moaned that the UN is too little, like the presence is too low in borderlands, which results in a lack of data and understanding of borderlands as such. I was also argued that the conflict and poverty and environmental destruction often go hand in hand and reinforce themselves, and that the UN can leverage its strategic advantage as being a very big organization with many specialized agencies and partners within the UN world, and also beyond the UN world, strong collaborations with NGOs and other partners. That such an integrated multi-partner approach is absolutely essential and strongly and urgently needed to deal with these very complex questions at the same time, and also leverage the presence that is already there in borderlands for different goals. We've once more also heard about environmental peace building, again, conflict related to natural resources as a problem, but also environmental peace building as entry points for cooperation. For instance, when parties such as we heard India and Pakistan, even during almost active conflict, they would also still have active cooperations in water management, for instance, even if it's only on sharing of data and collecting of data. And these examples are still underutilized, it was argued, and so build a strong basis for further action around this. And we've also heard about the strong potential not only of environmental peace building, but also cooperation in cultural matters, in tourism, and the key element of mine action, how mine action is not always just cleaning up the mines as such, but builds a sustainable or intermediate perspective for former combatants, for local peoples to be involved in sustainable peace building in the post-conflict settings. Very briefly about the two special sessions that we had. The first one dealt with borderlands, especially also in East Asia. We heard from Tsushima, an island between Korea and Japan, which indeed thrived much more. One could say while the tensions between Korea and Japan were still stronger, that was argued as such, so that the normalization of relations between the two countries has also kind of taken away its strategic advantage that it has had as an island. We've heard about militarized borders and how they are being reinforced by military industrial complexes of the world. We've heard an extremely interesting example of the South Kuril Islands, the northern territories at the border between Japan and Russia, where local cooperation has taken a very, very concrete form. And then we have heard from other examples at the North Korean-China border and at the intersection between North Korea, China, and Russia. And the special session just very few hours ago, just very recently now, has dealt with yet other conflict areas or areas of peace building in the North and East Asian region, such as between China and Taiwan, the Kinmen and Matsu Islands, and the cross-strait relation, as well as other case studies. Thank you very much, and a good discussion with all of you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, extremely thorough on everything that's been discussed so far. It's been an intense 3 days of discussion. I hope we haven't kept you up too much at night. Moving on, we're going to get started with the roundtable discussion. So I'm going to hand over the mic to the moderators, Mr. Paul Ladd and Ms. Kang Keum-sil. Are you there, Mr. Paul Ladd?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Sam, for that excellent presentation. That was really good. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we're into the a panel discussion now on the outcomes or interesting points from the forum. We're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to start off for about 30 minutes or so, asking some initial questions of follow-up, and then going to pass to my co-moderator, Keum-sil. I suspect what we'll end up doing is moving from the general, perhaps even the global context for Borderlands, and then we'll move to some of the specifics within Korea. And I'll try to speak also not as quickly so that we can translate effectively, and I'm very grateful also for the translators, the role in the conference they've played, and they'll do so in this session too. We had some questions submitted to us before the conference, and one of them, when I reread them this morning, stood out to me, and it was from Helen Coombs in the UK. And essentially she asks, what do you feel is the most crucial way of making an advance on this approach, and this approach being the nexus of development, environment, and peace? And so just to get a little bit more granular about that question, I gave the panelists a heads up. But the question is really, how do you advance implementation on this approach if you think that it has a value? What is needed? Is it additional research? Is it resources? Is it political will? Or is it simply a different perspective, a change of looking at things? And then from whom? Is it from only local groups and local governments? Does it need complementary support from national governments? What support can the UN offer from its different agencies? From who else can we get support for this approach. Now, moderating a virtual session is really quite different from moderating one where you have people in front of you on stage and you can ask people individually. So what I'm going to do is not put people on the spot, but I can see everybody on the panel. If you have something that you'd like to contribute on that question, please just put your hand up and I will make a list in order of respondents. So please, the floor is open, addressing that question. How do you actually make this approach real? Sang-Min Nam, thank you. Please go ahead. And then we have Stephen. And then I will keep an eye out for additional hands. Thank you. Sang-Min, please go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps, can I remove my... Well, your question is how to advance the implementation of the Nexus approach and who are the actors and what resources are needed to implement. And, you know, let me also reflect the discussions that we had. I was moderating the session 5, Sustainable Development and Transformation in Borderlands. And before touching upon those questions, you know, what we discussed was also the perception of a borderland. My colleague from your office summarized the key points from discussion. I mean, we look at borderland at the age or marginalized areas, and the periphery of a state control. At the same time, we also look at it is a hotspot for cross-border cooperation. We look at cross-border trade corridor or economic corridor. So look at that as a source of cross-border cooperation. So in this connection, so let me highlight that point first. So in Africa, yesterday, what we discussed was the continuing level of conflict in Africa, but there is also effort for institutionalized mechanisms to prevent the conflicts in around these Chad Lake areas and Sahel areas, and so also there are also efforts for institutionalizing cross-border economic corridor or transport corridor. So there are around 53 economic corridor projects in the world, and about 20 of those corridors are located in Africa, and then there are some in Asia as well. So this kind of institutionalized approach is key elements to support this Nexus approach. But meanwhile, there was also pointed that you know, you also asked about actors. So those interstate cooperation certainly involve central government, but when it comes to local community, so what we have to look at is what are the real benefit of those community living in the border areas. Often they are regulated in the process of interstate cooperation. So how to utilize the practices and information and knowledge of those local community. Also, how to utilize the existing level of interaction among communities in the border areas. So that was also highlighted, especially when it comes to transboundary governance for environment. We had cases from Central Asia, the managing international river between Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. So interstate commission to coordinate the action on this international river is important, but whether this process involves a local community who are utilizing the resources. So there was so the point we are also, this forum is co-sponsored by Gangwon Province and Cheorwon County. So while interstate cooperation between North and South Korea is important, led by central government, there is still important role for local government and local community. So we have to highlight those elements. And also, we look at the role of international organizations or regional organizations. They can be broke for interstate cooperation or dialogue. In many cases, whether African Union or Regional Commission of the United Nations, in Northeast Asia, Great Human Initiative Secretariat, this is intergovernmental mechanism. So those international actors, whether UN agencies or intergovernmental mechanisms, they play important role in facilitating that. So let me stop here for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Sung-min. Excellent. So you definitely highlighted the complementarity of local actors and interstate actors. And I think that we're going to have some follow-up comments and questions on that. But maybe pass now to Stephen Klingerbill, who's the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. The UNDP, obviously a huge country presence across the world, and therefore exposed to challenges in borderland areas in many countries. So, Stephen, what do you see as the way of taking this agenda forward, given maybe the perspective the UNDP has in different continents?
Thank you so much, Paul, for this, and really congratulations for a great conference. So I was attending many of your sessions, and I think really high quality discussions, a lot of inspirations. Since I do not have so much to say about later on the Korean Peninsula situation, let me address some aspects of your initial question, what is needed now. And I think when it comes to this question, what is needed, I think it's not just one topic we should highlight, but it's quite diverse. So from analytical perspectives over the research policy, Nexus, programmatic, and also operational aspects. Let me be a bit more specific. My first point is to have a good understanding is a very important starting point for decision makers. And this conference was really very great in this regard. What is borderland? What is the border? This kind of, just to reflect on definitions is something what is very fundamental in order to move on to solutions. So in this regard, to think about what is our framing is something what is highly relevant. The next aspect, and this was also done by the conference, to explicitly and implicitly address the question, is this topic relevant? And I think it became very clear during the conference that this is something what policymakers, decision makers, development institutions, other institutions need to look at. I mean, we have heard about those examples that 270 million people on the African continent are living in borderlands. We are facing the pandemic. We saw already Ebola a couple of years ago, and borders and borderland play a very crucial role in this regard. To look at, let's say, the challenges of borderlands, the security-related aspects. We have heard it about Sahel countries. What are implications for young population if they do not have an income? All these things, but also at the potential, how about nature conservation? How about potential for tourism, etc.? So this kind of understanding how relevant it is, I think it's also something what is important to have the communication with decision makers. My third point is the link between research and policy. I think this conference is contributing to this. And I think when it comes to many topics, also COVID-19, etc., we understand that this link is something what is important. It's important that researchers understand the needs of decision makers. It's important that researchers can also communicate and how to make sure that decision makers are picking up this. This is something what is highly relevant. I think one main aspect also highlighted by my colleagues from the Africa Borderlands Center is that also we as United Nations and development corporations, institutions, we are still not paying sufficient attention to this this topic. So, and I think to reflect on more on this link is something what is very important. And one way could be, for example, for United Nations organizations to bring together those actors to make it more operational. One more point when it comes to programmatic and operational topics is that donors, development institutions are very much organized along the lines of borders. And I think what became very clear is we need typically a regional perspective. Just to look at the border situation from the perspective of one capital is typically not sufficient. And I think development corporations, institutions, and I would include, all institutions, also UN and UNDP, need to be better about this kind of regional perspective, cross-border perspective to have a good operational approach. Presence in Borderlands, I think that was also something what was addressed by my colleagues from the Africa Borderland Center. Typically, many development cooperation institutions are not very strong in borderland areas. We have a couple of humanitarian institutions and not at least NGOs who are used to this kind of approach. But in this regard, I think it would be really important to bring together those actors more closely. And let me come to an end. I think we have a number of operational activities, how we can work with concrete project activities in Borderlands, from trading for peace. I did a couple of years a study for COMESA on this kind of trading for peace approach, for example, 21 countries in COMESA area, where this is a very important topic. We know, for example, that very often traders are female traders, for example, DRC, Uganda, Rwanda. To have simple basic infrastructure, sanitation infrastructure is something what is very important to encourage for this kind of cross-border trade. So this is something what can be addressed with very specific topics. My last point, and I think the African continent is again a very important illustration for this. Continental and regional institutions are very important in this regard. We have the African Union, we have the regional economic communities on the African continent. We have similar institutional framework situation in other areas. I think those institutions are really key in addressing those topics. So in this regard, I just want to highlight this, and we could even go further to details later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And just to reinforce one of your points, I see Byung-Jin An. I'm going to bring him in 1 second. And also, if others can indicate to me when Byung-Jin An is speaking, then I can also bring you in. To reinforce one of your points, it's not just that I've been in the UN for 15 years and before that in the UK government, in DFID, in Southern Africa and various other places. It's not just the mindset of a state-centered, capital-centered discourse on human progress and sustainable development. It's the instruments, it's the administrative structures. When you consider country programs get reviewed in assistance agencies, budgets flow to country teams for implementation in the country. So there's no mindset where you can sort of have a sort of a softer approach to an area which crosses a border. And the World Bank is also famous in its inflexibility in being able to address cross-border or regional approaches to programs. Please, Byung-Jin An, please, your comments on this question, or indeed any other reflections you might wish to make.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you, moderator. As was discussed, what should be done? What do we need? On that question, I want to make a few comments. As of now, the Korean government and the National Assembly are making a very interesting attempt. And their lawmaker, Lee So-young, may know better than me and the Moon Jae-in administration is now having this new Korean Peninsula framework, which is a quite new approach that they are now pursuing. However, for the past 3 days, we had many great discussions and many great questions covered. But despite this great approach of this new Korean Peninsular framework, we need to work further on this nexus, ecology and environment, and we need to take it from more encompassing framework, and we need to work on peace building and sustainable prosperity for coexistence from a holistic perspective. And as framework of theology, we need to further advance this framework, and that's something that we need to do under this new framework. Many scholars and leaders in Korea, with regard to the Biden administration, we are now looking into what the US and the Chinese government will do in the future. We need to analyze the future developments as well. But as was discussed for the past 3 days, the governments of the US and China may have implications, but we also need to think about the Japan, Russia, and the other countries located on the borderlands to see what are their common questions and common challenges. So we need to expand the perspective, and as was discussed by Professor Thu Min, we need to look into this epistemological perspective, and that is what we are trying to achieve under this new Korean Peninsular framework as an inspiration. So in this regard, well, this was a very interesting and meaningful session. And in conclusion, the political scholars tell a lot about this track 2 or two-track approach. The local institutions and Chinese, Japanese, and other countries, scholars and the think tanks and the movements groups or the civic groups need to work together to have this new DMZ regime as an idea, and maybe later they can serve as a basis for the new Korean Peninsular framework. That's one thing we can do in the future. So I hope this will not be just a one-off event, but it can continue as a way to pursue the regime. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I think there's clearly an appetite for this forum not to be taken in isolation, and to agree how we can keep the conversation going. And I think Stephen mentioned that on the UN side, I think there's a strong possibility for a collaboration across the UN, specifically on this issue, which can bring in research and discourse, participation and conversations, but also then will have programmatic implications, hopefully, for support that the UN can offer to communities, to local governments, and indeed to national governments on the prospects for peace and environmental stewardship and economic development that they want to make in borderland areas. But that's very much the intention, to keep this conversation going afterwards. Thank you, Byung-jin. May I also then just check to see if anybody else would like to comment on this question of concrete follow-up? And I see Hyung-jun Lim. Thank you. Please go ahead, Hyung-jun.
Thank you very much for your kind of opportunity to, and I would like to respond to the question very beginning, the question in the very beginning, the how to implement and what is needed and what UN can offer. And there is a very strong correlation between food security and peace. And recently, because of the COVID-19, there is a hunger pandemic around the world globally. So the number of hungry people increased from 135 million to 270 million. And there is a Security Council Resolution 2417 recognizing without peace, there is no zero hunger, and without zero hunger, there is no peace. So this is a very important part of HDP Nexus. And when it comes to WFP has been in DPRK since mid-90s. And at the moment, we've been working in 9 provinces, 90 counties. And we have three actually bordering provinces. South of Hwanghae has a direct border with South Korea, and also we have our operational coverage with the Northern Hwanghae and Gangwon province. And we've been doing three pillar activities. The most important activities is nutrition for the most vulnerable, children under 5 and pregnant and lactating women. And also we have food for community development work. It's a kind of platform that we do infrastructure, community-based infrastructure work. And also we have an emergency. And we've been the frontline agency, and recognizing that activities are limited at the moment, but in the longer term, we may have some sort of, I have a couple of ideas in my opinion. When I was working in Laos, we were working with clearing UXO, unexploded ordinance, with a partner NGO, and also with the government. And then we utilize the land for development activities. So we were connecting with the market, we were building the road and bridges, and we expand more paddies so that we could increase productivities and income generation. So it's an overall development project. Also, we've been planning agroforestry. So, we can prevent and deforestation and actually, so we are reforesting while increasing food productivities. So doing this in the partnership with NGOs, government, and other UN agencies. This is a kind of how we can actually offer in the longer term and what is needed. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Hyunjin. Now, can I ask if any other people, we've heard, I think, from our UN colleagues quite comprehensively. Are there others on the panel who would like to offer a perspective on practical next steps, or an idea that they would like to put, that they would like one of the partners in the collaboration for this forum to take forward afterwards? Indeed, including the colleagues from Korea who may be waiting for the next section of the dialogue. But indeed, if you have anything more generically about how the conversation from other parts of the world can support your process and aspirations in Korea, then please also feel free to speak at this bit of the panel too. Anybody else like to reflect on next steps? If not, then let's just follow up for a few more minutes on this question of humans and nature, because I think there were some interesting segments in the forum that touched clearly on human rights and human aspirations to well-being, to social development, to economic development, but also some, I guess, some radical ideas about also offering rights to nature, that nature in itself has a right within human existence, and humans are not living in harmony with nature precisely because we see it purely as a resource that we extract, and often we extract in a way which is not sustainable. I don't know if any of the panelists have any comments on this proposal, really, of a relook at the right structure, so that we give rights to nature and different parts of nature, so that would encourage are living in harmony with nature. I don't know if any panelists would like to offer a perspective on this. Sang-Min Nam, thank you. Please go ahead.
Just to break the silence, I volunteered. I don't want to occupy too much time, but when it comes to, I mean, in the context of Borderlands, we have to look at couple different dimensions, whether environment as a source of a conflict over the utilization of resources in the borderland. Another one is whether it can serve as a driver, as a cooperation. That's one element. Another context is, as Samuel also highlighted in his presentation, whether environmental cooperation, I mean, it is a means to achieve peace, or it is also end in itself. So certainly we cannot, disconnect that. Environmental cooperation itself is important, but it can also help improve, develop, increase the confidence building among the countries or among the communities. when it comes to like we have also that kind of experience in Northeast Asia, the border area between DPRK, North Korea, China, and Russian Federation. This is a main habitat for migratory feline animal, especially Siberia leopard and tigers. So this UNESCAP, which is serving as a secretariat for Northeast Asian sub-regional program for environmental cooperation, we have been facilitating those local communities to jointly survey the trans-border movement of those animals. And then based on that, so we are currently working with the Chinese and Russian government to create transboundary protected areas. So this is not directly related to your question about rights about the nature, but this is one approach to, I mean, certainly there is no border in nature, but there is political border. But this political border prevent, this has been an obstacle to coordination. So, but this kind of international cooperation can bring communities, countries, actors together, and they create, hopefully, transboundary protected areas. So joint management, how to institutionalize the joint management will be important elements for protecting nature in border area. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangmin. I'm going to bring in Stephen now. I want to give a heads up to Kumsil. I will pass over, when Stephen has spoken, I'll pass over for you to the next section of co-moderation, if that's okay. Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Paul, again. Just very briefly, the question, rights to nature is the way forward. I think this kind of thinking is highly relevant. I mean, I was just looking at the speech of the Secretary General Guterres a couple of days ago at Columbia University, and it's really worth to have a look at this speech. He was talking about making peace with nature as a defining task of the 21st century, and I think this is really the spirit we should look at this topic. When it comes to our Borderlands perspective today for this conference, I think Borderlands can be a pilot, an illustration, a showcase in this regard. I think we have heard about great examples over the last couple of days that sometimes because of this unique geographical setting, political setting, Borderlands might serve as an example. Just looking at, you hear my slight German accent, the former border between the two Germanys. This is still also very special in terms of nature. Yeah, also, going back to how the border was used during the time of the border, that was very unique. So what I want to say is there is a potential, and it was great that this potential was addressed during the conference, and to make it, very relevant for this rights to nature debate would be very suitable from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I would encourage those who are interested also to look at the SG speech. Clearly, peace with nature, a very powerful phrase, operates on different levels. The human need to be at peace with nature and the planet where we live, but also the prospects of achieving peace between humans with nature by using nature in borderlands and environmental assets and our shared responsibility for those as a key building block for peace between humans themselves. And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at this. I would just like to say I'm going to pass to my co-moderator, Kumsil Kang, but thank you very much for your comments and contributions on this panel, but also throughout the conference. And I really hope that we can continue this discussion at the very least, but also turn it into something practical and helpful and useful. And for our part in UNRISD, we stand ready to assist with, as we do, research and policy analysis using case studies and examples from all over the world to also help within the context of career as well. So thank you very much from my side. Kumsil, over to you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, and for the great comments. We have these forum questions within the DMZ and the Borderlands. We are having this conference on the Nexus, and many people wanted to have this conference more and more moving forward, and the multilateral conferences of the UN and how they can really contribute to the peace on the Korean Peninsula. And moving forward, maybe we can tackle this issue together. And also about the human and coexistence and harmony with the nature. As we worked on the sessions, I think more than 2 times we had these sessions and questions on how we can have both development and the environment as the rights of the human beings to develop the infrastructure. We need to reconstruct the relations between the human and the nature. We have to protect the nature, but also we have to develop for our own sake. And there is some conflict, but we don't have any specific and clear answer to this question. But as we have more of this forum and discussion, I think we can come up with a great solution. And in terms of the peace building work, the peace by peaceful means and the state-oriented peace were what we have been used to, I mean myself as well. But from this conference, we could learn more about this peacemaking approach, which should be really relevant to the borderlands, and it should be really catered to or customized for these local conditions. And that's one thing that we need to do moving forward. That was very impressive perspective. About the DMZ on Korea, I want to further promote this discussion. In the special sessions today, we talked about the borderlands in East Asia. And the conclusion was that in the borderlands, for universal and general dynamics and mobility and the local focused actors and their participation were taking place. However, in East Asia, the national government or the central government are really putting some pressure on East Asia. So when you talk about DMZ, well, when will it gonna open up? We were not sure and pessimistic about the outlook because it has been closed for 70 years. However, now we have this community of living creatures, and it can be a vision for our future. So that really was very inspiring and encouraging. So in this space of DMZ, as a panelist, we have a lawmaker and we have 2 government officials. So from the local governments and the central government and from the National Assembly, maybe we can hear their perspectives. So first, I'd like to invite them and introduce them one by one so that we can hear about the Nexus on the peace, development, and environment, their outlook, and their thoughts and observations and recommendations for the Nexus and implications for the Korean Peninsula. First, I'd like to invite lawmaker Lee So-young. Lawmaker Lee So-young, for many years, she has played many critical role. Well, the climate change action is now a big part of the debate, but she has been working on this issue for many years already. And also, under the Korean government, we have this Green New Deal policy, and she's now in charge of formulating this Framework Act. Let me invite her.
안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I'm Lee So-young. Can you hear me? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this meaningful conference. As the executive director, Kang Keum-sil, introduced, I used to work as a lawyer for environment. Now I'm working for the Korean National Assembly. Today, I don't want to just talk about the Korean Peninsula and DMZ. Instead, I want to go beyond that. I want to talk about the peace building and peace development in East Asia, to a larger extent. That is also the topic of this conference. We heard a lot of stories and topics about this for the past 3 days. So I'd like to add my own insight and thought to what we have heard. Regarding the topic of this conference, I think it is inevitable to talk about climate change because there is a correlation between climate change and peace building in borderlands. In recent months, we've experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. The keynote speaker, the Minister of Unification with Korea, Lee In-young, said we will have new normal and climate change impact will be widespread in the coming years. I think everyone will agree with him. In many areas, we will experience more and more droughts and extreme weather events, including droughts and floods, as well as water shortage and ecological destruction. In this context, let's think about the borderlands. Borderlands have geological homogeneity, so they will share something in common in terms of natural disasters. They require common response and common action at the global level. When we take climate actions, one country cannot take the action accurately alone. So we have to think about building cooperation in areas of conflicts. That has justification. Korean Peninsula is one example. So let's talk about the Korean Peninsula. The issues about the DMZ is related to inter-Korean peace building. To build peace between the two Koreas, we have to think about where we should start. When it comes to inter-Korean cooperation, we cannot put aside the global power or the neighboring countries, including the US, China. Let's say the two Koreas will cooperate in reducing greenhouse gas emission. If the cooperation can be expanded, it will contribute to global response to global climate change. And so my suggestion is that we can have more potential for cooperation if we move away from the political competition but focus on cooperation in climate change action. North Korea emits only 6% of the total amount of greenhouse gas generated by South Korea. So if South Korea can transfer its technologies or advanced facilities or equipment for North Korea, it will help North Korea reduce greenhouse gas. One area of cooperation is reforestation because, as you know, trees can absorb greenhouse gas or CO2. And South Korea announced carbon neutrality by 2050, China by 2060. But for North Korea, they may be able to achieve carbon neutrality by even 2040. So by working on environmental issues, we can still continue to build peace on the Korean Peninsula at the same time because we can contribute to reduce air pollution, and it can also lead to job creation in North Korea. And in the process, we will have more and more conversations and dialogues between the two Koreas, and that will be the entry point of inter-Korean cooperation. Greenhouse gas emission reduction is not the only example. In terms of climate adaptation, the inter-Korean cooperation can be expected because there is much potential in the process. By building peace, centering around the DMZ, which was at the top of our agenda in this conference, we can expand cooperation, and these approaches and these ideas are not limited to the border areas on the Korean Peninsula because all borderlands share something in common, so these ideas and approaches can be applied to all borderlands across the world. in East Asia, Northeast Asia recently made a proposal which is about the power network building, and that can be a solution to energy, increasing energy demand in using renewable energy sources. There are also areas for cooperation. By taking this opportunity, I wanted to make these suggestions. Once again, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to make this comment. And as a National Assembly member of Korea, I will continue to work hard to make a contribution. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. As we are facing this common challenge of the climate change and climate crisis, the two Koreas need to be connected and cooperate together. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite the Director General Kim Kwang-gil for Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Office of the Ministry of Unification. On day one, we had a session on the North Korean or Korean Peninsular conditions, and Minister Lee In-young of Unification made a very strong keynote, and I'd like to invite Director General Kim to present an official position and stance of the Korean government on this issue. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Can you hear me well? Yes. I am Director General for the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Office of the Ministry of the Unification. Well, I couldn't attend all these sessions, but it's a great honor for me to be a part of this roundtable. Well, I don't know where to start, but as I listen to these comments, the UN is working on the borderland and paying attention to these borderline region issues, and that is quite encouraging. And in the keynote speech, our minister mentioned the Korean government is now pursuing many different initiatives for the DMZ, but in the previous administrations about the DMZ, they released many plans, but they were not really implemented. Under the Moon Jae-in administration, we are now carrying out a few projects. In 2018, we had this Panmunjom Declaration, and we also had this declaration on September 19th to turn the DMZ into a peace region, and under that vision, we are pursuing many different initiatives, as was covered by the minister in the keynote speech. So what I'm going to highlight today, I won't repeat the message, but I want to add a few things to help your understanding. First, as was mentioned before, to build peace, it's not just the role of the central and national government, but the local governments need to be involved, and the civic groups and the civil society needs to take a part. So in building peace, to turn the DMZ into a peaceful venue, we pursue the civic involvement. More specifically, in the DMZ, we had this 화살몰이 고지, and there are the mines, and we clear the mines in certain regions to build peace on this DMZ. In the DMZ, we also created a road for peace so that people can feel what it would feel like if we have this peace on the Korean Peninsula, and they can reminded of this meaning of peace on Korean Peninsula. Gosung is a city in Gangwon-do and Cheorwon County in the central part of Gangwon-do, and we have Paju in the west part of the Gangwon-do. We opened these roads, and after the October, we had this swine flu. We stopped this project, but on November 18th, as we are completed with this quarantine and the control of the swine flu, despite many difficulties, we reopened the road so that people can be involved in experiencing this whole journey for peace building efforts. And the second part, we have the JSA and all the Panmunjom area. After the agreement between the two Koreas, we are now working on to turn that into a space of peace. So people can now visit this Panmunjom area and facilities. As I explained, in terms of these different projects, we are pursuing the active involvement of the citizens, and the local governments are also actively involved. In the Hwasalmori Goji, we also uncovered the bodies of the soldiers and other dead bodies, and also the government, the central government is playing more of a supporting role so that the local governments can play a leading role with the support of the central government. And in addition, the national government, I think other presenters also mentioned this, the DMZ is a space for peace. And I believe the Kaesong Industrial Complex, I myself worked in the Kaesong Complex for 10 years. And on Monday, I went through this complex and passing the crossings. And then I come back on Friday. And on my commute, I always hope that we can have peace on the Korean Peninsula. But still, we had many some events where the tensions mounted. And I experienced that myself. But the peace building work, as many other presenters mentioned, should be also including the economic preservation as well and the coexistence with the nature. So the other thing that we do for the DMZ is to designate the DMZ as the World Heritage by UNESCO, and in this process we don't want DMZ to be remembered as a war place, but it should be remembered as a valuable place having many values in terms of the environmental resources. So by the end of this year, we applied to be on the candidate list of this World Heritage by the UNESCO, and we are now working on this. In addition, on the DMZ, on the Korean Peninsula, it has a very unique situation. DMZ was created by the armistice or the ceasefire agreement from the Korean War, and the sovereignty or the legal framework and enforcement, there are still some disputes and arguments, and the DMZ is on the map, but how we can apply the Korean local laws, there were some challenges. So the constitutional law of the government, how we can apply it to DMZ, and we need to enact a new set of laws. This discussion is now underway in the National Assembly, and about this, the ministry is now cooperating closely with the lawmakers. So likewise, we pursue the participation of the citizens and turning DMZ into a peace-building place, and we are now supporting the local government's efforts as well. However, in doing this, there are some challenges, of course. Above all, DMZ still faces military tensions, and we had some agreement between the two Koreas, but the agreement has not been really followed through in the region. So how we can really continue to ensure the compliance with the agreement is one key question that we are facing. The Moon Jae-in administration, based on the inter-Korean agreement, we first want to focus on what we can do as a way to clearly show our will to inter-Korean cooperation as we are waiting for more actions from North Korea. And UNDP and other UN institutions can also help us in supporting this effort. So far, we had many agreements between the two Koreas and international organizations. Their support might have been very instrumental if we could get the support from the international development and other organizations as we reflect on the past we had. So to summarize, the government is now pursuing the peace-building effort in the DMZ, and we want to support that as we work on this project with the citizens and international organizations, and we look forward to more exchanges with diverse stakeholders, and we want to see more of this kind of effort like this forum, and we will do our part in supporting this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Director General Kim, as I listen to your comments, the Korean government is already working on the nexus of the peace, development, and environment as it deals with these North Korean or DMZ issues. And especially, it's really putting much value on the participation of the civilians or citizens. Next, we will hear from Byun Jung-kwon from Gangwon Province, Director of Peace Region Progress Headquarters. Once again, thank you for hosting this event. Borderlands in Gangwon-do are called as the Peace Region, and Mr. Byun is in charge of this, so we're gonna invite him.
Good afternoon. I'm Byun Jung-kwon, of Director of Peace Region Progress Headquarters of Gangwon Province. First of all, I'd like to pay my respect to and thank Executive Director Kangum-sil of People for Earth for hosting the PLZ Forum. Today, I'd like to talk about the current status of the borderland in Gangwon Province and challenges it is facing. DMZ is a demilitarized zone, and civil access to the area is strictly controlled. It is very difficult to imagine to access the area because of numerous landmines there. When it rains hard, buried landmines find their way to residential areas, including the farmlands, and they are causing problems. DMZ in Korea is 453 square kilometers, and 300 square meters of that, or 66%, is located in Gangwon Province. Starting from Paju, the MDL, military demarcation line, that runs from Paju City of Gyeonggi Province to Goseong County of Gangwon Province is 248 kilometers, and 145 kilometers of, or 58% of it, is in Gangwon Province. So in the areas adjacent to the MDL, $100,000 out of 600,000 sized Korean army are stationed due to its geopolitical nature, as they are bordering the North Korean territory in places. This Gangwon Province is a place where there is military tension between the two Koreas. The population of South Gangwon Province is 1.56 million. In North Gangwon Province, it is 1.49 million. By administrative district, South Gangwon Province has 18 cities and counties, and there are 17 cities and counties in North Gangwon Province. The population of Cheorwon, Hwacheon, Yanggu, Inje, Goseong counties, which are adjacent to the DMZ, is 150,000 in 50,000. In Hwacheon County, there are areas where the army stationing there outnumbers the populations. That suggests that under the excuse of necessary military operations, 49% of the total land is designated as military facility protection zones, and in the case of Cheorwon County, it is 98%. In these counties, new building construction, building height, and development activities are limited, and as a result, resident arrangements and activities are limited as well. The regulations made it difficult to build SOC infrastructure there, and lack of access also led to difficulties to host manufacturing or other industrial facilities. The local economy is mainly based on the primary industries, and the army is inevitably influencing the local economy up to 50%, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Soldiers there are not allowed to leave the military bases, which has a detrimental impact on the local economy. And by 2020, due to the ongoing reform of national defense caused by decline in military resources, the Korean army will be 100,000 soldiers less. And in border areas of Gangwon province only, 22,000 soldiers will be reduced. This makes the situation in the areas worse. So, to address these issues, Gangwon province plans to declare the border areas in Gangwon province as a peace zone, trying to revitalize the areas and making large investments. Working with the Ministry of National Defense, we plan to build a council for coexistence through which we can ease regulations and improve policies and institutions related to national defense. We also plan to build tourism infrastructure, taking advantage of ecological, cultural, and security resources. And working with the Ministry of Reunification, we are doing a project to discover remains of the fallen during the Korean War that has been going on Arrowhead Hill, located in Cheorwon. We have a plan to build a peace memorial museum on the hill, as well as a peace road surrounding the DMZ, and make those areas a tourist destination. Our plan also includes new cultural facilities and programs that can be shared among local residents and soldiers. We are having a weekly program for this. And another plan is a program to exchange or refund 30% of the expenses local soldiers spend in the areas with a local gift voucher. And to improve quality of living and quality of life in the areas, Gangwon province is working on numerous projects, including refurbishing the landscape. In parallel, we are doing projects for exchange to improve inter-Korean relations. Gangwon province is the first Korean local government that implements inter-Korean exchange projects. Our project started in 1999 in humanitarian assistance, sporting events, agriculture, forests, and social and cultural sectors. The province carried out exchange with North Korea, but that was halted because of the UN sanctions against North Korea for its nuclear development. Inter-Korean relations improved dramatically after that, as North Korea participated in 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic and as inter-Korean summits and the US and North Korea summits were held, before tensions between the two Koreas increased as the Hanoi summit between the US and North Korea collapsed. Gangwon province is preparing for another small Olympics that will lead us to go beyond and toward the path of world peace. We are trying to host 2024 Gangwon Winter Youth Olympics, and we will try to convince North Korea to participate in the Olympics. We call it Gangwon Winter Youth Olympics. There is a reason for it. Whether it is a Winter Olympics or a Summer Olympics, an Olympics is named after the hosting city. For example, Tokyo Winter Olympics will be hosted by Tokyo next year, and Beijing Olympics scheduled for 2022 will be hosted by Beijing, as the name indicates. Uniquely, Gangwon Winter Youth Olympics is named that way because we want it to be hosted by both South Gangwon Province and North Gangwon Province together. We are discussing a possibility for both Koreas to be co-hosts the Olympics, or a possibility for both Koreas to split certain events. If we can co-host, the opening ceremony can be held in South Korea and the closing ceremony can be held in North Korea, and ski can be held in South Korea and other sporting events can be held in North Korea. So we are thinking about many possibilities. For that, we are in talk with the IOC and the organizing committee of the IOC. Regarding U.S. and North Korean relations or inter-Korean relations, we expect situations over the Korean peninsula could change with the new administration launched in the U.S. Internal and external environment of the Korean peninsula is expected to change. Still, Gangwon Province will continue to respond to the change by working with the central government, international organizations, and civic groups, as well as to implement projects under our plan, regardless of the changing situation. Lastly, I'd like to talk about values of DMZ. The Korean War left the DMZ, which has been untouched by people for the past 70 years. As a result, the DMZ became a place where plantation was restored naturally and having high ecological values that should be preserved. If we develop DMZ only with a focus on economic benefits, we'll lose the time that we spent for the past 70 years. We have to fully conserve the DMZ and use it peacefully so that we can overcome the division and restore ethnic homogeneity. The DMZ should be developed as a place for exchange between the two Koreas. Lastly, if reunification is a distant future, the ceasefire should be replaced by a declaration of end of war, and the DMZ should exist as a place for peace, not for division. For that, Gangwon Province hopes to continue to work with the UN, the international community, and everyone who has joined in this conference. Thank you very much. Personally, I was born in 1957, so personally, I think I have high interest in the issues of unification and inter-Korean issues. That was one of the biggest issues while growing up. Not only inter-Korean exchange, but interaction between generations in both Koreas should be more expanded. Younger generations pay little attention to the inter-Korean relations because they've never experienced the war and they don't place importance or emphasis on the inter-Korean relations. So maybe we should do more to educate them about the importance of the inter-Korean relations. And Professor An suggested a new regime. He studied the U.S. politics at school, and I'd like to ask if you have anything to add after listening to the comments from other panelists. Professor An?
I will make just a few brief comments. For past 3 days, we had many great discussions and presentations on different questions and key points. This new DMZ regime, if we can build that, well, still there are some functional perspective, but we can move beyond that and we can incorporate these Earth jurisdictions and the biocrash and biodiversity, and also the deterritorialization and the biodiplomacy. There are many great new framework and tools available. So I think it was very insightful. So this new DMZ regime can capture these different questions and the tools, and we can reconstruct our existing framework. Well, I think this is a very significant forum, but let me make it a bit light. Around the world these days, especially there is like a top selling, like or popular Netflix shows. It's a Queens, and there is a girl, and she has become the chess champion of the world. I'm talking about this because this genius girl has become a champion with a strategy which is, she didn't follow the classic rules, or she didn't play by these classic rules or traditional ways. So she really made a huge paradigm shift in how she won the games. So I think this can be a really big Queen's Gambit. So I would like to incorporate all these inspirations into our implementation and execution. So Ms. Gang, please watch it. I'd like to make another light comment. On my way here, Mr. An really wanted to, or insisted watching this, and I downloaded Netflix on my phone, but I couldn't watch it yet because I didn't have time to attend these sessions. But I'd like to add session 4, and on our special sessions, we talked about this non-human existence or actors and the interplays between these actors and their network can be one way to approach the nexus, the nature, development, and space. Well, in terms of conceptualizing these whole different ideas, rather than that, we have to come up with these ideas to build this nexus into something that's more concrete. We have the panelists from UN institutions in Korea. As you work for the UN entities, in Korea you might see many different things happening with politics, DMZs, and inter-Korean issues. So as a person who is working for the UN, and also as you experience the Korean society, it could be about your experiences or your questions or comments. Is there anything that you want to share with us? Who want to start? Stefan? Any observations about Korean society? Stefan, please.
Have any? Sorry, there was an echo. I do not have any specific comment at this point. Maybe later on. Thank you.
이명주 소장님.
Mr. Lee, please.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee Myung-jun, please. Thank you. As you mentioned, yes, Korea is a very dynamic society, and we need to work hard. But
yeah. If you think about the situation on the Korean Peninsula and around the world because of the pandemic, I don't have much to talk about either yet. What about Director Nam? Regarding North Korea, we've been working on a project to build capacity in North Korea. Now we are in phase 3. And specifically, we are working on environment, transportation, and energy, and disaster. And we invite North Korean officials in those sectors and providing them with training. And if I can tell you more about inter-Korean cooperation. First, if you think about the Korean Peninsula, when the inter-Korean relations were better than now, you can see that North Korea was not willing to cooperate with South Korea. And Cheorwon Plain is an area prone to flood, and North Korea has this area that is conservation area for cranes. And in 1958, the first natural reserve was created in North Korea, and it was a little bit later in South Korea. And in 2004, North Korea signed the Ramsar Convention. And under the convention, a wetland was designated as a protected area in North Korea, and it is protected by the government there. So Cheorwon and Gangwon province, without direct cooperation, if the direct cooperation is not possible, Cheorwon and Gangwon province still can cooperate by building a network or creating or connecting natural habitats with those habitats in North Korea. North Korea has a wetland preserve protected areas in Hwanghae, and Gangwon-do also has areas for ecologically protected areas that have high ecological values. And South Korean government has been working on cooperation for wetlands in the West Sea. But, broadly speaking, cooperation for wetlands can be an area for further cooperation when the two Koreas' relations improve in the future. As the National Assembly woman Lee So-young said, from climate perspective and geopolitical perspective, borderlands have something in common. There are 260 international streams, but in many cases, multilateral cooperation systems and bilateral cooperation systems are in place to cover the international streams. But South Korea and North Korea lack such systems. Basically, when the two Koreas are not talking for now, and that has led to damage to natural environment, including streams. And UNDP's Natural Convention can be used to expand the cooperation between the two Koreas. The Duman River is shared between North Korea and China, and North Korea and China has introduced a bilateral system of convention to protect Duman River. So that means North Korea has already had this experience of international cooperation in protecting a natural area, and this can be expanded or rolled out to South Korea as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. As we have this discussion, anyone who would like to add? Anyone who want to add? If not, thank you for the great and valuable and insightful comments. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you and for participation and support. I'd like to hand over the microphone to Paul for closing. Please, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kumsil. Thank you very much, the panelists, for this session. We've reached the end of the forum, but we clearly haven't reached the end of the discussion and the follow-up. So I'm very keen to signal straight away that UNRISD is very willing and able to support this discussion going forwards on borderlands in Korea, of course, but also in other parts of the world, so that we can act as a hub for knowledge exchange, for research, and for research that feeds into policy and practice and concrete support for communities who live in borderlands, and for the assets that they work with and protect, including those that are environmental. I also wanted to say that the conference, I think, the forum has been very successful. We've had over 1,000 people each day following each of the sessions, whether it's through live or catching up on YouTube, depending on which part of the world that they're in. So I would also like to congratulate the whole team, the organizational team that put it together. It takes a lot of work to put these virtual meetings together. All the sound checks, all the team that sits behind it, all of the coordination of us, all of the emails, and I think it's very worth mentioning the long hours that people have put into making this forum a reality. Thank you, everybody. And then lastly, there's a form on the YouTube page that you can fill in to give feedback, which could be ideas for follow-up. It could be things that didn't work well that you would like to see work better next time, or things that you enjoyed, or points that you took away. So please take the time to fill out that form, and we will endeavour to learn from that and make sure that we continue to contribute to this discussion to make it something proper and real. So with that, thank you everybody, and thank you for all the hard work and your thoughts and perspectives.
Thank you very much. That was the last and closing session for the forum. A big round of applause. This forum was hosted by Gangwon Province and Cheorwon County, and also the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development and People for Earth. It's been a very intense 3 days of discussions. I thank you all for being with us, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.